Okay, Exodus chapter 34, verses 29 through 35. It came about when Moses was coming down from Mount Sinai, and the two tablets of the testimony were in Moses' hand as he was coming down from the mountain, that Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because of his speaking with him, being God. So when Aaron and all the sons of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. Then Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the rulers of the kingdom returned to him, and Moses spoke to them. Afterward, all the sons of Israel came near, and he commanded them to do everything that the Lord had spoken to him on Mount Sinai. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would take off the veil until he came out. And whenever he came out, he spoke to the sons of Israel what he had been commanded. The sons of Israel would see the face of Moses, but the skin of Moses' face shone. So Moses would replace the veil over his face until he went in to speak with him. Okay, what do you think about that? I think our normal recollection of this event probably comes from Paul's treatment of the story in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. And Paul takes a very different, puts a very different spin on the story, I think, than the account. This is one of those things, when the New Testament writers quote the Old Testament, and you go back and look at the Old Testament passage they quote, it's like, that's not really what it says. You do that a lot. They take some kind of poetic license, and they certainly, uh, especially someone like Paul, who is a Pharisee, is going to rely a lot on rabbinic tradition, on their interpretation, and a lot of times that is quite creative, a great creative treatment of the text. Uh, I don't know, embellished. I mean, I don't know what you, Robert, then we'll come back to PD. Yes. Okay. This certainly is reminiscent of the Transfiguration with Jesus and Moses and Elijah, and there's a demonstrable effect from being in this situation. Moses is transfigured in a way in his presence in front of the Lord, and it is reflected and makes an impression on the people. So, what do you mean by embellish, Mr. Winters? Well, they would go kind of far afield. I mean, I think, and that's they were really trying to apply it and see what other meanings something like this might have, other than the ones that are just right on the face. And the thing is, it wasn't like one rabbi said this is what it means and that's it. The rabbi would offer maybe an interpretation, and another rabbi would respond to it, and it would get refined and worked on. It's today. Uh, you may have heard of the mantra "publish or perish." It's for college professors. If you don't get published in scholarly journals, you're out. It doesn't matter how good a teacher you are. You're not going to get tenure if you don't get published, if you don't write things. And you have to write them not for Newsweek or Time, you write them for scholarly journals. And those articles are peer reviewed, is what they call them. Other brainiacs look at it, other specialists in your field of endeavor, whatever it is, read what you have to say. And you know they're going to read what you have to say. And they're going to try to find anything they can that's wrong with what you said. They're going to try to rip you to shreds. In other words, it's like being a Church of Christ preacher, basically. But that's what they do. It's called peer review, and they really try to, we have it, I guess, with the Bereans searching the scriptures on Paul. So that's what they do, and they really, really work. They proofread. They submit it to other friends and have them give honest and sometimes brutal feedback. And you have to be able to take that brutal feedback, looking at your methodology, looking at your research, constantly updating it, making sure you're not just saying exactly what someone else has already said, those types of things. And yet at the same time, not ignoring what other people have had to say about it. That's the first thing you do when you think about writing some kind of scholarly paper is has someone already done exactly what I'm trying to do right now? And a lot of times the answer is yes, because there's so many scholars out there. Someone has already done it. And then you try to say, do I need to update it? Is there another spin, another angle, something like that? And you also just look at all their research materials. What did they use to formulate their paper and everything? And what can I draw from that? And is there new thinking and things like that? So these rabbinic traditions, it wasn't just one rabbi, after another, just writing notes down and just saying this is what it means. It's an ongoing debate, and because a lot of it was written, it could take place over the centuries. And we do that in Christendom now. The Christian thinkers, Christian big concept of the word, from the earliest days, wrote letters that are not in the Bible, so they're not biblically authoritative or anything like that, but they're very enlightening at times, and they have really good thoughts, and they have survived now millennia, and they have been parsed over and really dissected by Christian thinkers ever since then, and they're still out there, and those discussions are still going on. So, a guy in Kansas City, Kansas, can argue with St. Augustine back in the day, or whatever. One of those things. St. Ignatius, whoever you want to throw them at them. I can't even remember all their names. Certainly not all their names, but I've read some of them, not a lot of them, some of them. And a lot of it's really good thinking. And it's probably better than my thinking. I can't probably even fully appreciate it, but it's Paul is adding his voice really into the discussion on that, and I don't think he's not trying to get us to go back and look at that story and find the discrepancies between what his take on it is and how the story is told in Exodus. He's trying to take a general story that they're all familiar with, which was how Moses' face would shine when he is in the presence of the Lord, and how the people could see that. And then he takes the story as, well, he would put the veil on the face, not so because they were afraid, because it was shining, but so they wouldn't see it fade away. Well, if the shining is making them afraid, why would the fading away need to be hidden?
He wouldn't have the respect or fear or the power of being God's spoken.
Okay, Paul takes it in a more kind of, I guess, theological sense, not so much the people themselves, but it demonstrates the transient nature of the power of the law, that the law is not an eternal solution for humanity and sin. And so Paul says they see it not so much that the power and respect isn't there, but the understanding that this is not God's final word on the subject. The glory of the Lord, as it was put on Moses, passes away. And Paul is using that to say the old law, the glory of the law passes away. It has passed away. It has faded. And then, though, he says also, they put on veils, and they put a veil on their heart whenever they read Moses. Now, Moses is putting on the veil in the story. Now, Paul is saying they put on veils. So they are not seeing it clearly. And I think to a large extent we all put a veil on our hearts and our minds when we consider a new subject. It's very hard to look at it. Nobody comes to the Bible, particularly in a vacuum, with no history, no prejudices, no experiences, no biases, biases. We come into the Scripture with our life as we are. And Paul says the gospel works, it functions, it is the power of God for salvation from faith to faith. Again, yes, Jesus are the only way to God, but there are any number of ways to Jesus. We were all brought to Jesus by someone, somehow, something. And each one of us is probably a little bit different. Yes, sir. Yes. 180 degrees. Yeah. Completely opposite.
He's bringing with him all of that tradition, all of that knowledge. There's a life. So this way, now this way. Well, it had to influence him. Not in his belief in God, but his view, the way he views things, has to have something. It's affected by it. It's something that it can't be.
And his story is very different than the other apostles, than the 12. And their stories differ between even themselves, but they're all kind of lay persons. They're just running rank and file Jews, basically. They're not in the theological track at all. They're not Levites. They're not. I don't think so anyway. But they're fishermen. They're tax collectors. They're whatever they are. And I can't. I'm not. I can't remember everybody's occupation right now, so I don't want to make a statement that's wrong. I don't want to get peer reviewed on that sort. Now they call it today. The kids call it ratioed on social media. Like if you post something on social media and you get a few likes and you get a whole bunch of comments telling you how you're wrong, you were ratioed. The ratio between likes and corrections. So I might be getting one of those. But Paul's story is different than everybody else's story, and everybody else's story is each kind of different from. But he didn't walk with Jesus, at least not as much as he may have been around some. He may have heard Jesus speak publicly at some point. He may have had some encounter with Jesus. He might have been. We think age-wise, they're not that far apart. Jesus might have been just a few years older than Paul, maybe not even that much. So it's we can't preclude the possibility that Paul encountered Jesus during his earthly ministry at all. That Saul of Tarsus was never around when Jesus was preaching or teaching. We don't know that. We can't say that. What we can say is that he was not a disciple of Jesus while Jesus, in human form, walked the earth. That wasn't Paul. And now he is a disciple, and he makes his claim repeatedly to being an apostle. I am an apostle. And that carried some privileges and authority that no other position in the church carried. So he had to repeatedly assert that privilege, and a lot of people probably never really bought into it. He certainly had his critics, but he is saying he looks at this as he takes this really, I think, kind of poetic or creative license with the story. And it's not really so much about what Moses actually did, it's about how Israel responded to what Moses did and what they have done, how it has impacted the people. And the veil, uh, clouds, their understanding of Scripture muddles it. Each, I think, of our own veils to some extent. I don't claim, and I hope nobody here claims to look at the Bible and see everything exactly what it means and how it is. And I've got it down, buddy. I've got figured it all out. But that's one of the great things about living in a Christian community, in a church community, coming together and hearing the gospel according to Dolores, the gospel according to Alma, the gospel according to Robert and Paul David, and such like and so forth. Everybody coming and bringing their story. This is what Jesus did for me. And I think when we talk about personal evangelism, how do we approach people? I think the best way to approach someone is when you have a chance and you develop a relationship with them, share what Jesus has done for you. Share how Jesus saved you. And that's kind of where I think a lot of 20th and 21st century Christians, kind of baby boomers and younger, have a hard time because so many of us were raised in the church. We may well have lost sight of the saving moment in our life, that we weren't really saved, that we became a Christian kind of in the natural order of things. This is just what we were going to be, and it was handed down to us. And that's not really what happened for anybody. We were lost and we were found, every single one of us. And if we've lost appreciation for that, that's us. That's on us. That's not on God. But it does kind of dampen our enthusiasm for scriptures. I saw a video on Twitter the other day. I don't know what group it was. They were doing it. They were going to do an infant baptism, and I think just a little dab on the forehead of a little girl, and the mom's holding the little girl, and the priest has got his books, and he's holding them out, and the little girl just slaps down on the book, and it flips over and falls into their little font there. It was really funny, And we look at that, and in our tradition, we don't value that. However, we do value and feel the need that people need to be baptized when they reach the age of accountability. Well, what is the age of accountability? And is it an instantaneous thing? One, it's different for everyone, really, in our real understanding. But you could be legalistic about that. You could say 13 or whatever. Some age, at 12 years and 6 months, you're not accountable. At 13, does it happen overnight? Does it happen in the twinkling of an eye? At one point you're not accountable, and then the next point you are accountable. So we have to understand the workings of God in our context, in the human experience, and basically everybody has to draw some lines here and there somewhere. And I'm not advocating at all for infant baptism. If I've given that impression, I'm sorry. That's not my point. That's They have some interesting thoughts on it into the discussion that most of us that I never heard growing up from people who discounted it. I never heard their other side of it. I've heard them now, and there's probably more. But whatever. So anyway, we come into the scriptures with all of us really a veil over our heart. And Paul's asking us to throw the veil off. And he's particularly calling upon first century Jewish Christians to throw the veil off and just see Jesus, whose glory is not going to fade away, whose glory is eternal. And, it's a scary thought. It's really hard to let go of what you were raised with. It's really hard. I joke, sometimes talk about food. You can tell why I'm interested in food, I guess. But so many times what we eat, it's just what mom cooked the whole time growing up. And we're not going to eat anything my mom didn't cook. Now, I eat a lot of things my mom didn't cook. My mom eats a lot of things she never cooked. She's become quite the adventurous eater in the last 10 or 15 years. Uh, but there was a time when she was, kind of, and we got our eyes open culinarily speaking by moving to South Texas. That will change your palate. That will change everything. You wouldn't think you'd eat that, but you put that hot sauce on it and it's good. And you would think you could never eat anything that hot, and then you find out that's really good too when it's that hot. So everything is hot in Texas, at least South Texas. The barbecue is hotter than the Mexican food is, or the Thai food is out here. The barbecue, just regular barbecue, it's spicy. So I like it. I've been down there in a while, so need to get back to Corpus, I guess. But uh, we all come into the Scripture, we all come into our faith from a background. One of my professors said we all stand on the shoulders of others, and that's fine. And we just need to acknowledge that. We need to not feel like I'm a Christian because I'm so smart. Maybe you're a Christian because you were very blessed with Christian parents. Maybe you were a Christian, and I believe every saved person is a Christian because God called them. That's why they're saved. Why is Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai? Because they're such a great nation? Because they're so smart? Why are they still alive even though they practiced idolatry? They're there because God called them, because He chose them. And He chose them not because they were the greatest, but because kind of they were the worst. He went after the wallflower at the dance. I mean, he didn't get the one anybody. He got the country, the nation nobody else really wanted. So if we can get over ourselves to some extent, I think we can start seeing what God. We have a better appreciation for what God has really done for us, and we're always going to have kind of a veil on, but Jesus tore the curtain. That's kind of symbolic of tearing the veil too. So we see God through Christ, and we always will, and there is nothing wrong with that. Okay, we got about 10 more minutes, so we're going to move on. These last several chapters, as I announced, we're not going to go straight through. Probably, it may feel like that. It may end up working like that. But the handout is 35 through 39 rather than 35 through 40. My intention is to treat chapter 40 separately than the other chapters, but still, hopefully, give it its own, but a single week. I don't know how quickly we're going to go through all of these chapters. I'm not got a clock on it. I just don't want to sit here and read them all over again when they're so similar to what we read before. So, with that, Exodus chapters 35 through 39. You can bring up 40 if you want, but you'll probably just be talking about it all yourself. So 35 through 39. Anything jump out to anyone? How many people actually read the text? I got two. Robert says yes, but it was 10 years ago. So.
35 and 3. But you shall kindle no fire for your dwelling places on Sabbath days. Some of the restrictions. What does that mean if you have a fire going before the Sabbath fire? You keep it going. So the only reason I ask that is because that's what the Jews did. It became very
Yes.
What God said to do. And because of that, and I think we do the same thing today. We look at the New Testament, if we're not careful, we'll read a passage like that and say, oh, okay. But if I'm here and if I go around this way, this doesn't affect me.
I think it's one of the things about legalism, one of the negative impacts, there's a lot of them, but one of the negative impacts of legalism is you end up with trying to sort out which laws take priority over the other laws. And what's going on in this context, the reminder of the Sabbath that starts out this section, is in the context of actually building the tabernacle. Now, building the tabernacle is a really big deal. There's no doubt about that. But even in that context, something takes priority over the building of the tabernacle, and that is to keep Sabbath. Sabbath is one of those absolute core laws. I heard a lot growing up, sin is sin. Any violation of God's law is sin. And yet there are priorities of laws among God. That attitude that sin is sin, whatever violation of the law is sin, it's all equal. That's the priest and the Levite talking in the story of the Good Samaritan. The non-observant, the non-Jewish Samaritan said, love your neighbor. I mean, there are overarching principles of loving God, loving your neighbor, what that means and what that looks like. What if the Good Samaritan encountered the man robbed, beaten, and left for dead in the ditch on Sabbath? Well, I would help you, but it's Sabbath. He shouldn't have been. Maybe he was out there Friday and got beat up Friday afternoon and was still there Saturday morning. Yeah, maybe he shouldn't have. And that's not part of the story, but yes, he shouldn't have been, but now what? Maybe he is on a Sabbath day journey. You could walk some distance on Sabbath. I mean, that's how the legalism works. That's where you're stepping in every little line. You can do this, but you can't do that. You can throw another log on your fire, but you can't kindle it. I think they would have considered that a violation. Today, observant Jews don't even light their stove on Sabbath. I don't know if they use a microwave or not. Probably not, but I don't know that. But they will not. Especially if they have a gas range. I don't know about electric range, but a gas range, that fire coming on, that's a big one. But this is the thing: if you keep Sabbath when the tabernacle is being constructed, then you're going to keep Sabbath in the harvest, in the planting, which comes up every year. Still big deals, and you owe God the first fruits of all that. They probably weren't as bad as ours are today. We bred them to be. A Holstein cow will give 75 pounds of milk a day. So. But now they have machines that milk the cows. The farmer's not even there. The cow just walks. They line up. They wait their turn to get milk. So.
Because he was trying to show that you've gone so far with your legalism. You're changing money and you're not understanding what the temple's all about.
They erected barriers between poor people and God, their ability to worship God. They wanted to go into the presence of God. And because the money changing, they're going to take a cut off of that and everything. And it wasn't just the changing of money; it's to buy the sacrificial animal. You couldn't come in, even if your animal was perfect. You couldn't come in with it. You had to buy their animal, which may not be perfect.
It is. I read that story. I read Christ is showing us what is the most important thing here. Is it the sacrifice, or is it the respect of God and His temple?
Okay. Yeah, and this brings up that story, the money changing, kind of brings up why they would really, to a large extent, copy and paste these chapters and use them again the second time. They did that a lot between 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. They did it in the Gospels, we think to a large extent. Mark was the first one written. Mark is also the shortest. It doesn't have a lot of the interesting story. It doesn't have the birth narrative. It doesn't have a lot of things. They think Matthew and Luke took Mark and expanded upon it. But there's still parts where it looks like they copied and pasted Mark and put it in theirs. Some stories from all four Gospels are in all four Gospels. Some stories from Christ are all in all four Gospels. One of those stories is the cleansing of the temple, the money changing, turning over the temple. In the synoptic gospel, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they happen near the end. In John, it happens up front. And the easy answer is to say, well, he must have done it twice. And only John recorded, but he didn't record the second one. Well, why do it? They already, other ones recorded the second one. But John is so distinct from the other gospels almost everywhere, all the way throughout it. But in that, and I'm not a Greek expert, but in that text, telling the story of the cleansing of the temple, it is almost verbatim in agreement with the other three gospels. It looks like he copied and pasted it from them and put it into his gospel. But he put it in the front instead of the back. He put it early in his ministry rather than late. Mm-hmm.
He had something in mind when he was writing it. And it must have been me when I'm looking at it. Then I felt I could find him and let him do it.
And it displays, I think it emphasizes their, well, we get to at the end of chapter 39, their adherence to the commandments. The first section, they're told to do this. The second section, they just changed kind of the person and the tense of the verbs. They did this. This became this. It was flawlessly, more or less flawlessly executed. So strictly obeyed the commandments in that regard. And if they had changed up, you start changing up the words, you can ask Terry sometime. I mean, one thing the police officers like to do when they think you did something wrong is get you to tell your story multiple times. Why? Because each time you tell it, it's going to be just a little bit different. And the first time you tell it, and the 10th time you tell it, it's going to be probably pretty radically different. Yeah, you start out with an airtight alibi and you end up confessing. And, you know, so it's even if you didn't do it, you end up confessing. So that's one of their things. So they avoid that to some extent, limit that by taking that text and just changing the names of the people and the tense of the verbs. Do this. This was done. So that's why they have the redundancy. And that's why the Gospels aren't so redundant. Now, even when they take stories from each other, a few details will change between them. It's a man outside of Jericho, on the road to Jericho. It's two men on the road to Jericho. It's Bartimaeus on the road to Jericho. Why isn't it just Bartimaeus, or why isn't it two? Who was Bartimaeus with somebody? Or it's the same story basically, but it changes. Did he cleanse it early in his ministry? Did he cleanse it late? Did he do both? That's kind of our stuff. Those are our hangups. That's us trying to put everybody through the ringer, trying to shake everything out, and then getting defensive about it when somebody does it to us. That's our problem. That's not something they would have been all that concerned about. So, okay, thank you. We're just a little bit over, but I had to make a little side trip.